in the workshops. How was that? Did you find the language challenging?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I can imagine if I was being translated now, everything takes twice as long, which just means that it's a lot more energy for everybody, for people in the workshops that are listening, to have to listen twice. I have to say something that has to be repeated. It's like, can you imagine? So there are, so there's that kind of element to it. But I think when you're reading a play, you're looking at sort of structures, deeper, and trying to sort of talk to someone about how they might develop it. You trust that it's a translation that's not going to give you, especially if it's a working translation, it's not going to give you the finesse, and that's what's so wonderful about seeing the plays now, because they've been translated so well. And so we just looked at a kind of developmental issues when we were looking at the plays. I think it was kind of it's a very workable kind of attitude that we had towards them. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Can I now ask Laila and perhaps the other playwrights if you would like to comment on how the process has been for you? The journey of 2 years, having to work on one play over 2 years, and to do so through workshops in different countries, and then to have the experience of the plays read in different countries in the region, then in London.
The process was interesting on different levels. One level was, of course, the workshop and all the discussions that are theoretical and yet go into also practice at the same time. But also, I think one of the strengths of the project for me was being in a working process for such a long time with other artists from other Arab countries, and especially that I had had experiences with Palestinian and Lebanese and sometimes Syrian artists, but none from the other countries, and getting to know what you have in common and what you don't have in common, and the issues that you face as an artist there, and also the very individual ways of thinking and working, and seeing your own play develop with that luxury of having advisors. You usually write or direct, and you don't. After you leave university, you have hardly anyone who gives you feedback all along the process. You hear critique after you finish, or you have co-workers, but nobody outside of the work to look into it and let you know what they think, or just have someone to discuss with. And I think that was quite a luxury, having that for the first time, but also seeing the other plays and the other playwrights develop their work throughout was also amazing.
Would you like to comment on the process?
Actually we talked yesterday, so just to think but it's better to give the chance to others. I mean, I think something similar to what Laila said. I think it's more or less the same. I mean, it was interesting journey. But we talked yesterday, and we feel silly to be those. Yeah, I know. It's look great. Anybody?
I would say what we said yesterday. Hamad yesterday said that for him the play, he wrote it, the first draft resembles a lot the final draft, even though it was a very long journey and 3 workshops. But for other writers, for me also, it changed a lot. From the first draft till the last draft, there was a big evolution because of all these workshops and all this time we had to think, and these encounters with the other writers from other countries, and it was we never thought that we would end up here or in London.
This before, I would like to use this as an opportunity to hear back from you, actually, and for the playwrights to have the opportunity to have your feedback.
But I think the evening also for the panel tonight, the idea about the project, you know, what was the idea behind the vision from the British Council, as well as of the Royal Court, you know, what this extraordinary project, and then also first from Professor Marvin Carlson to hear a bit from his point of view, having studied, teaching Arab theater over the history over centuries, how this project would fit in.
I was just going to move to that, actually. But would you like us to talk more about the project itself before we ask Professor Marvin to sort of put these plays in perspective? Shall I say a bit about the project?
Yes,
okay. Well, it goes way back. Because this project initially started as a country project in Syria alone. And it started as a bit of an adventure from my end. I had attended the Edinburgh showcase, the British Council showcase at the Edinburgh Festival, and that gave me the opportunity to be exposed to plays by new Scottish playwrights. And I was very impressed by the work, and I felt there was commonality between the issues that concerned them and those that are of concern to us in the Arab world. A very distant and strange commonality, but one that I decided to sort of try to follow. I did so by inviting David Gregg, the Scottish playwright, to come to Syria for an initial workshop with the students and recent graduates of the drama school in Syria, who didn't necessarily, they were from a department that didn't necessarily focus on writing for theatre. It's called the Theatrical Studies Department, and one of the small subjects within it is writing for theatre, and quite a neglected subject. So it was all really a big adventure. But the amazing thing is that out of the 20 participants we had at the time, we asked them to write plays, and at least an initial draft of a play, and we decided that if we get something back, then we'll carry on. And we did get 12 plays, which was absolutely amazing. They needed, of course, a lot of work and development, but they were plays, beginnings and ends. So there was, at that moment, it felt that the idea is not completely crazy. What I was interested in is giving young people in Syria who are experimenting in theatre the opportunity to go back a little bit to the basics, because there was a kind of boom of young people wanting to do work in theatre after a long period of kind of silence in Arab theatre. Arab theatre was very lively in the 60s and 70s until the early 80s, and then there was a period of just few works by individual directors here and there, by some playwrights, but no fresh blood was coming into Arab theatre. And when it decided to come back, it was done in a very sporadic way, and I felt that there was really a need to go back to the basics, but with a very contemporary push, which I felt is very strong in the Scottish theatre. And towards the end of the project in Syria, it was only natural when we decided to do readings of those plays to invite the Royal Court to join us in this project. We were very lucky that they were available and that they agreed, and we carried the journey forward. It ended in Syria, and now the writers we worked with in Syria have actually formed a writers group and are still working together. And we continued this project with 7 countries in the Arab region, and today you saw the result of that bit of the project, which was also very exciting. We did the selection through an open call for applications in 9 countries, and we got an amazing number of 100 applications, and we had to select from those. We selected initially 3 writers from each country, and then those who survived with us in the journey, we were eventually left with 7...
well, 7 that we brought to London, but of course many of those writers had the work done in the region.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. So this is, but we never ever thought, we knew that if this work is developed to a high standard, we would take it to London, but the writers themselves didn't know this. And so this wasn't the incentive for working on the plays, but we never thought that we would come to New York. Elyse, do you have anything else to add?
No, that's
What is the history? What is the history of the Royal Court and British Council? Is it a typical project? Is it different? Or?
Well, it's different, as I said, because of the different countries. But the Royal Court I did talk about it, and I could speak forever about it. But the Royal Court, when it was founded as a new writing theatre in 1956, was really founded as an international theatre, and really people like Wally Soyinka or Samuel Beckett were principal writers of the theatre. But we sort of lost that focus on international work, I think, in the 70s and 80s. And we started doing the international work, coincidentally, the year that the wall came down, in this kind of way, going out to other countries and doing what we do with writers in Britain. So the British Council came in on that project in the early 90s, and they've really been a very strong partner with us, along with a foundation called Genesis Foundation, who support all the international work as well.
You had done, prior to this project, you had done work in Palestine.
Yes, we've worked in Palestine since 1998, and that was the first country in the Arab world we worked with before we started to work with Syria.
Excuse me, when you say Palestine, do you mean
I mean
West
Palestine.
Bank,
I mean the West Bank.
Yeah.
I mean only the West Bank.
And
We started to, and Gaza. We had writers from Gaza, but obviously there were periods of time we couldn't get into Gaza.
But it's also Russia and your history with other countries.
The work around the world includes.
Can you just name some?
Uganda, Nigeria, Russia, Mexico, Cuba, Brazil. You can, yes. So many countries where there's been a real interest in new writing, and where it's really looks like we can have genuine partnerships with theatre practitioners in those countries.
Thank you, Elyse. Now, Professor Marvin, last but not least, we have a beautiful expression in Arabic for this, but I can't translate it. It's much
say it in Arabic, that's all right.
I would like, given that you have done a lot of work on Arabic drama, you have been a follower of Arabic drama, and you have put together anthologies of Arabic theatre, and you have attended last night and this night. I would like just you to put the work you've seen in these 2 days into the context of what you already know about Arabic theatre.
Well, thanks, Laila. Thank you very much. It's I must say, first of all, all this is a dream come true for me to be able to be involved in such a program, and to see these plays and meet these vital and wonderful young artists. I think I would like to, of course, obviously I'm here not as anybody who has helped put together this marvelous program, but as somebody who's interested in the field and has been involved in the field in a fairly serious manner for a while now. But I do think, and of course I'm also here partly as host, so I'm delighted to welcome you to my institution. Let me indeed just very quickly give a certain amount of contextualization, at least from my point of view. As some of you know, I'm an inveterate theater goer, and I've been really quite regularly attending the theater, well, indeed around the world, but obviously especially in New York for almost half a century now. During that time, up until the last very few years, I only had the opportunity to see one play from the Arab world in almost 50 years. Elyse says this is a historic occasion. I want to just sort of underline how historic it is. The one play that was done was at a very small theater, and it was Tufik al-Hakim's The Tree Climber. If people in the United States knew any Arab playwright, they probably knew Tufik al-Hakim, but probably nobody else. And most people had never heard of him. The New York theater has really not opened up to the Arab world at all until very recently. So this is truly a pioneering effort. In the last 10 years, the New York theater has developed a very exciting Arab American theater by our Arab American community, and a number of people involved in that have been involved in the program here. And this is a very exciting and important development. But we're still just getting started in terms of, in fact, making available plays actually created by artists working in the Arab world. I have to say that just a little over 10 years ago, the Siegel Center had a one-day conference at which we had, it was called, the theme of the conference was the Contemporary Theater in Egypt. This was, to the best of my knowledge, the first such scholarly conference in the United States, and presented readings of, for the first time, of living Arab playwrights. And we had readings of one-act plays that evening from Leonard L. Romney and Alfred Farag, both of whom were there and participated in the program. So we were groundbreaking then too, and here it seems to be wonderful that just a little more than a decade later, now here comes a much more ambitious and much more extensive and wider-ranging in many ways program. Not just a single Arab country, but a whole panoply of countries, and equally exciting, a whole new generation. Leonard L. Romney, who is a good friend of mine, and Farag, who was a good friend of mine until his death just a few years ago, these were wonderful playwrights and justly famous in the Arab world, but they were already well established. Nobody knew them here, but they were well established there. In a way, it was a, what would I say, even though it was somewhat daring to do Egyptian playwrights at all in New York, it was not, the choices were not daring. These were well-known, established playwrights. Here, and I want to underline again what Lisa said just a few moments ago, for people interested in the Arabic theater, it's extremely exciting that there was this very exciting period of the 60s, 70s, maybe even into the early 80s, where Farag and a number of playwrights in Algeria, Morocco, Syria, Lebanon, were doing Egypt, were doing very exciting work. And then came a kind of a missing generation for a variety of reasons, somewhat different in different countries. And those of us who were interested in the theater of the Arab world began to get kind of disillusioned that the golden age was past, and maybe everybody was turning to television and films now. And so I can't tell you how exciting it is now to see this revival, and not just a revival in, say, Egypt or Syria, but a revival as these wonderful examples show you, all across the Arab world. So once again, I want to underline, you are really witnessing a historic moment, both in the Arab theater and in the New York theater. And I'm very proud for my small part in this. So thank you.
We're very modest describing it as a small part, because we know you give too much generally Arabic theatre, exposure of English-speaking readers and audiences to Arabic theatre. So thank you. So at this note, I would really like this evening to be an interaction with you. It's a unique opportunity to have such an interaction for us coming from the region, to be able to meet an audience in New York, and I guess for you as well, to meet playwrights and everyone who has been involved in this project. So please, we'll start taking questions.
So we had to also to hear better.
Yeah, the play was very fascinating, this Palestinian play tonight. And I was just wondering what restrictions the occupation authorities impose on Palestinian playwrights and artists in general for writing and for performance.
Unfortunately, tonight we don't have Imad, the playwright of the Palestinian play, with us, but I guess myself and Elyse can speak on this. Would you like to take this question?
I don't, I mean, I think the work within Palestine, he's been absolutely free. This was a very controversial play in Palestine. It was shown, I went to the opening in Ramallah at Al-Kasaba Theatre. It's taught all over the West Bank. And people absolutely loved it, but it was something very revolutionary and very different in Palestinian theatre. It was showing the prisoners who are seen as heroes, you know, as human beings with all the complexity of any human being, and sometimes critical of their country, and sometimes not being absolutely honest about why they've been made heroes. And I think that was a very shocking and ambitious thing for Imad to do. And he got a range of responses, some really great positive responses, and some people who were truly shocked by seeing that for the first time.
Yeah. And in terms of your question on restrictions, I live in Syria, but wherever you live in the Arab world, you know enough about Palestine, and I myself am originally Palestinian. I guess the main restrictions they have, well, first, you know, the whole situation. A considerable part of the country still being in some way or another under occupation. But also, for instance, when Elyse says it toured the West Bank, it did tour the West Bank, but you can just imagine what it means touring a play with all the restrictions on movement within the West Bank itself. So I can imagine that having been a very difficult process, and I know of lots of theatre makers who suffer there from this, but this is somehow is more an incentive for them to do theatre and to use the power of theatre to move around in these very difficult conditions.
Did it tour as a full production or as a reading?
No, as a full production, a really beautiful full production.
It was produced by Al-Hara Theatre Company.
Al-Haya Live.
Al-Hara.
A new company that Imad the writer had formed with one of the directors in the project, Manal Awad, a very, very young company who were very determined to bring new work by West Bank artists.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Let's okay, you, then you, and
Fun, let me do this.
Yes,
You can see everyone.
I was very moved by the piece that I saw here tonight. And I'm sorry that I missed last night or yesterday, whenever it was. I would like to hear from the playwrights about their process of work, the themes that they write about, their influences. If the influences are also parts of a tradition of theater in their own countries, or outside influences, because there's a whole, thing going on here with Britain and the Royal Court Theatre. Maybe I'm asking too many questions in one. Sorry.
So it's a question about themes,
influences,
way of writing, and then influences.
Laila? It's a difficult question. Themes. For themes, I would say meeting Elyse for the first time, she asked a question, and I think of that question whenever I start writing, because I wasn't conscious of the choice of themes, directing, choosing plays, or writing. And she asked us, what are your obsessions? And I think that's a word I prefer to themes. So I think that's a very individual matter, and how, also going back to Attar's, what he said last night about being political or not, I can say that for myself, that I think even if you don't write about politics, the choice not to be political is political. So that's how I would sum it. So I think it's very individual what themes we chose and how far they reflected about either social or political or economical or international issues in those plays. Concerning influences, I think we all come from different theater backgrounds, whether in terms of what other professions or practices we do, but also what other training we have. And I have to confess that most of us were not very familiar with the Royal Court before starting this project. So what a British playwright, the challenge a British playwright might have had of and how far I am being influenced by the Royal Court style cannot apply with us, because one, we are writing in different language, two, we were not very aware or conscious of their style or school of writing.
I would only just have to add that there is no, I would never say there is a style. People may think there is, but we would never say that there's one way, that, and I think our range of work would show that. So.
Maybe there are other playwrights? Sorry.
Sorry, yeah, I'll just add once again that I think the workshop was the playwrights, April and David, and of course Elyse, they did not impose any frame or any style, right? But definitely there were certain exercises and orientation for what's modern, new writing or contemporary writing could be, and it's. But I have to add something also that from personal point of view, and I'm a participant and now a playwright among playwrights like in this panel and in this evening. That I appreciate the variety of the productions. I mean, the pieces have been written. But I have to say something. I would say it for the first time. I think most of us really, sorry for talking on behalf of my colleagues, have failed to prevent the political, heavily political influence in our complicated context in Arab world. I think, which made the pieces brilliant for me. But still, I think personally, because I was very practical about my piece, I just put the rule and the frames before I even start to think about story. I just decided that I need to talk about, to have that few characters, the minimum possible, and one space, and to write an everyday speech, because we have the standard, the classical Arabic, and we have the everyday dialogue. So I put the rules even for thinking about the story, the plot. And I try my best, because I know I have this headache about most of the first productions for Syrian Arab, I'm not saying all, that these productions, whenever they are, I mean, films, novels, short stories, are heavily influenced by the political, economical, social developments and obstacles that surrounding us. So I tried my best, and I really determined that I need just to talk about a very simple plot, everyday story and something. And I thought I kind of failed, I mean, to avoid this political penetration here and there. And I would say most of us did. Sorry for this, but I would say so. Yeah. And that is, I think it is indicator, I mean, it is indicator for loads of things. Yeah?
I will translate.
يعني بالنسبة sorry I can't speak very well English so I will speak in Arabic. I said this yesterday. Okay. بالنسبة لي يعني ككاتب يعني ككاتب مسرح لا يمكن أن أكتب شيء خارج عن الحياة التي نعيشها، عن الواقع الذي نعيشه.
For me as a playwright, it's not an option. It's not possible to write something outside the life that I live, the reality that I live.
يعني الآن أنا في سن ربما تجاوزت 30 يعني أعرف جيدا ما أريد أن أكتب يعني.
I'm now over 30, so I feel I know what I want to write about.
يعني وبطبيعة الحال ما لا أريد أن أكتب.
And what I don't want to write.
يعني الكتاب أكتب المسرح يعني بالنسبة لي أنا أتبع حدس أنا قلت هذا الشيء.
I very much follow my instinct when I write for theatre.
هذا الحدس يعطيني إحساس بأنني مثلا كاتب خط واحد. هذا الحدس الذي عندي يعني يعطيني إحساس بأنني كاتب خط واحد يعني خط واحد one way.
كتبت خط واحد ولا أنت
كاتب يعني
كاتب خط واحد.
خط واحد. So this instinct would sometimes tell him that he's a writer who's writing in just one way, one direction, very one-sided, if you like.
لا سأشرح يعني كيف.
I will explain what this means.
يعني أنا إحساسي بأن لما أريد أن أكتب عن شيء أحس به أنا أحس بأننا نعيش في عالم يعني يفتقد إلى السعادة.
I feel, for instance, that we live in a world that lacks happiness.
يعني موهبتي ككاتب أن أفهم هذا الموضوع يعني أسأل أطرح أسئلة حول
what is required of my talent as a writer is to try to understand this phenomenon.
يعني لماذا نحن الأساس؟
Why aren't we happy?
ما هي أصلاً السعادة الآن؟
And what is happiness anyway in today's world?
So يعني تتعدد المواضيع ولكن يعني الشكل العام كل مواضيع تحاول أن تجيب عن هذه الأسئلة.
So I may have different themes, if you like, but they are all an attempt to try and answer this question. As if you should have
if we think that writing, if we write honestly, being true to ourselves, it's like writing our lives. It's like writing the color of our eyes. يعني you can't change who you are, and we live in countries where political and social conditions are very different and very شنو يعني ضغطين؟
very oppressive.
It's not restraining
and pose a lot of pressure.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not talking about political oppression or censor. I'm talking about conditions in a country where, because I come from a country where every 2 years we have big war, we have car bombs, we have presidents being killed, and it's very different from what you can feel. So if someone lives in a country where he feels that there are many powers over him, where he can't control everything and he is not given many things, he has to struggle a lot. Then it will come out in his writings. And I want to add something that in the American translation and the American acting that we saw, which was very nice, it was very different from what we hear in Arabic, because, and also the audience responded in a very different way, maybe more positive, in a very, very different way, because they don't link to the things that are said the same way.
Thank you all. Any more questions, gentlemen?
Thank you. First of all, welcome to New York and welcome to the United States. Thank you for coming here.
It was very hard to be here, right?
It was very hard. You get to enjoy yourself.
It took me 3 times.
Muhammad had to apply 3 times for his visa. This is why.
I'm impressed that I saw something in English. Are you writing in English? Are you writing in your original language, Arabic, whatever? And what has that been like to try to make something mean something from your culture, your language into the U.S. English language?
First of all, we all wrote in our Arabic dialect. And for instance, I can't read Kamal's play. Kamal is Moroccan and I am from the Middle East, I'm Lebanese. He is from North Africa, so I read his translated play. As for writing and making it make sense to a Western audience, we never tried to do this. The translation did it. So it makes sense in Arabic.
So just to clarify that in terms of the project, English was never a requirement. Neither in the open call for application, it wasn't a requirement to know English. It was open to everyone. And everything was done through interpretation. Even the workshops, we had interpreters in each workshop. Just so first of all, not to limit the selection, because that would really limit the selection, not only in terms of numbers, but in terms of the kind of writers you would approach. Because if you put English as a requirement, you would end up with writers who may be exposed to English theater or naturally write in English, and it's a completely different profile. So we wanted it to be more, if you like, authentic, more open.
And I would just add that the translators, who haven't heard this before, that played an absolutely integrated part in the whole project. They worked very closely with the writers in the workshop, and they were absolutely involved. When we were doing it in London, they were involved in the rehearsal process. They were involved in helping the final drafts for the book. So they're part of the rehearsal process.
To say something. One thing, I think, to mention it, only one of the 21 writers wrote her original script in English.
Yes.
Everybody else didn't. But for me personally, the process of translation was very important in the learning process. One thing to go through the translation, it was the first time that I had my work translated. Not only, it wasn't my first written piece, but definitely like the first one translated. And going through that process of translation, knowing what I'm trying to achieve stylistically with the language in Arabic, and sometimes letting go of that and realizing what of it is important to be translated or not. And also to sort of be able to hear the play and let people hear it without those stylistic issues, and then know the essence of where its strengths and weaknesses are. And I think that was a very important thing.
Yeah, let me. I think let me just say a word or two about the problem of language, because not everybody may be familiar with this. First of all, there is a general Arabic language, classical Arabic, which for a time in the 20th century, many writers, if they wanted to do something rather more elegant and literary, would write in this. This can be read throughout the Arab world, but people don't speak this. I mean, they can, but they don't. People on the streets speak the dialects, and we mentioned dialects. But I wanted to emphasize that when Americans hear the word dialect, they may think of, oh, a Brooklyn dialect or a Southern. It's much more extreme than that. That is, there are of course many words in common, structures in common, but intonations, pronunciations are different enough so that it really is very, very difficult for, let's say, somebody who speaks Syrian Arabic to understand Moroccan Arabic. So that it's not that they're exactly different languages, but they are enough different they're much more different than what we think of when we talk about dialects. And I emphasize this because I think it is enormously to the credit of the Royal Court to find translators, not just who knew Arabic, that would be relatively easy, but who knew Syrian, Moroccan,
particularly
Egyptian.
Moroccan.
Yeah.
And just to add that this big difference in the accent is mainly between Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, North Africa, basically with the exception of Egypt and the Levant, if you like. Otherwise, between Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, the different dialects are understood.
And the actors here did another translation, right? Or
Yeah.
Directors. Maybe
Yes, sometimes they said, well, there are Britishisms here that nobody in the American audience will get. And so it was, we had some wonderful, like, trollop. And
Bog.
Bog, and
bloody.
Yeah, a lot of bloodies, yeah.
Two things. One is I'd like to ask you three about influences. When you were studying, this gentleman asked before, were you reading American or British playwrights of the 20th century or past centuries, or was it pretty much Middle Eastern in your universities when you started out that you were studying that theater tradition? And the other thing, do you think that it's your generation in general that wants to avoid the direct, what you call political polemic? I agree everything is political in some sense, but it seems to me, and from other parts of the world as well, that very much your generation is more concerned with everyday living than the larger questions. And I just wonder about that personal and political.
Yeah.
Do you think a lot about the relationship of them?
So it's two things, the influences and also the personal and political concern. Kamal Mofan, would like to do? I would like to
Okay. Regarding the influence, I think it's, I would say it's not equal at all. I mean, definitely theater in Europe, Eastern Europe, and Europe generally, and North America is much more progressed. The text even, not just the form. I'm talking text-based now. So personally, we have I think quite good drama school in Syria, relatively speaking, compared to the region. It's the only one in Syria and Damascus. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's also personal.
What were you studying? What were you studying? What writers?
I mean, personally, I know because something it's not in the curriculum. I mean, if you are talking about American, of course, you start with Tennessee Williams, Arthur Miller, and Eugene O'Neill, and I stopped with Sam Shepard, you know, and that's it. I know.
And also Russian, there's strong Russian.
Yeah, but she asked me.
Generally.
In
general, what have you been exposed
Okay,
to?
yeah, it would be the same, I think, more or less. I mean, it would be influenced by Brecht, whatever the name in German, and then Chekhov and Ibsen and realism, expressionism, and you know, these trends in school, absurdity. It's very.
And also Arab writers from the past.
That's the point. I was like closing to it. I mean, we don't have this really strong. We are influenced. I mean, by some. Mr. Marvin, I mentioned some of the names, but I mean, personally, I can't say it's statistics or theory or something. Personally, I would say that in Arab world there is no clear trends or schools. Even when there was the kind of strong movement, still it's. For me, it was very political because you can imagine Arab world like part of the whole world in mid-60s, and it was, I mean, revolutionary phase in the whole world anyway. So for me, I appreciate this most of these productions, but for me, it's too much political and educative and you know, didactic in a good way sometimes, and in very bad ways other times. But I mean, the influence for me, I would be like, yeah, there were some few figures, I mean, in Syrian, Egyptian theme, scene in particular.
Kamal, do you want to give us the perspective of North Africa, because I think there's a stronger French influence.
إذا فهمت صح.
هو سؤال إنه أنتم يعني درستوا شو اللي بتعرفوه عن المسرح العربي؟ شو تأثر
يعني
فيه؟
أوكي. يعني كذا لما ندرس المسرح ندرسه أظن كباقي الطلبة في جميع العالم يعني.
He thinks that when we study theater, we study it like all students around the world.
يعني بدءا من التاريخ يعني من الأشكال ما قبل المسرحية إلى.
So starting with the history of theater, the pre-theatrical forms.
نعم. المسرح اليوناني وكذا.
Greek theater and so on.
يعني والمسرح الغربي في جميع مدارسه وفي
And then the Western theater in all its schools.
يعني وبعض الملامح التي تحدث عنها محمد يعني الملامح من المسرح العربي.
And then some of because of the names from Arabic theater.
لكن
classical.
أنا أعيش في المغرب وربما عندنا في شمال أفريقيا هذا التأثير يعني بالمسرح الفرنسي يعني.
But I live in Morocco, and so there is a very strong influence of French theater.
يعني الساحة المسرحية في المغرب هي متابعة جدا للساحة الفرنسية، الساحة المسرحية الفرنسية.
Theater scene in Morocco is very well exposed to French theater.
يعني مثلا الآن في المغرب يعني في مسارح كثيرة تشتغل مثلا على مؤلفين فرنسيين جدد يعني.
هذا وين عفوا
بالمغرب يعني.
So in Morocco there are lots of companies who work on new French writing.
يعني مثلا برنار ماري كورتاس، زافي دورانجي، فينافير، يعني هذه الأسماء كلها يعني الفرنسية موجودة في المغرب.
All these names are known in Morocco and
you will get exposed to them.
Yeah.
بالعكس يعني اسماء يعني حتى نحن درسنا يعني كما قال تنسي ويليامز وجين اونيل وارت بير وكذا، لكن اظن في شمال افريقيا شوي يعني منحصره شوي يعني في الجامعه ممكن نشاهد مسرحيات في الجامعه يعني في الجامعه وبعض
They studied of course Tennessee Williams and Miller and so on, but in Morocco they're probably more biased to francophone theater. I would just add to that in general, whether it's North Africa where there's more exposure to French theater, or the Levant where it's more the influence of Russian theater, a mixture of Russian theater, a bit of other Western culture. But in general, when we started this project, there was little exposure to new writing from the West, certainly from Britain. Very few new. I mean, it would reach up to Pinter, and then anything beyond that would be the individual interest of the students themselves if they dig through the internet, and they would have heard of Sarah Kane, but not much beyond that.
I would say...
Yeah, he's had his hand up for a long time.
Yeah, I was going to give him...
If I can just say, I studied at the American University in Cairo. So I think another problem that we haven't approached with talking of the French influence and looking back at this issue of the 80s, not much development having happened in contemporary Arab theater since the 70s is having all of this Western influence and yet trying to create a new voice that is yet up to the same level of what you know and yet completely your own. And personally, this was for me a challenge, and this is why with all the Western education I had, starting from a German school to an American education, the issue was with all of this good education I had to improve my Arabic, start again working on Arabic literature, and then rethinking of how can I use what I know and bring it into my language so it doesn't sound like everything I know that stopped in the 70s and yet be genuine.
We will take the gentleman's question and we will come back to the second half of your question around the personal and political, because it's important. So can we take
what type of audience were you targeting with this play? And why did you choose to do this play specifically? And there's many unheard voices in Palestine. Regardless of how good our media is, I mean, it is pretty modern and up to date.
Sorry, I didn't.
There's many unheard voices.
Yes.
There's many unheard voices in Palestine. Specifically, these 4 things. Why'd you, these 4 prisoners, why'd you choose to portray this?
He's not here. Why did you?
I will ask him.
The last bit of your question, why did you, there are many unheard voices?
Why did the playwright chose the 4 prisoners as voices from?
Yeah. And will you be using your talents to like get the message out?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the playwright is not here. Of the Palestinian play is not here.
I think all I could say is that something that people don't know is that more young men in Palestine have been in prison than not, I would say, because people get arrested quite easily. Ahmad himself has been in prison, not for a very long time, but he was. And as a first play, I think he chose to write about this experience and some of the people he knew in this experience.
And what audience was he targeting? I mean, compared to this, where did he intend to reach? What audience was he trying to reach out to?
I think that's a question for all of the writers who I think maybe were not even thinking about.
Or is there anybody you don't want to reach if you write a play? It's in a way, there's no limit on who you might want to reach.
And just to add to...
No, sorry. No, I said what she said.
You want to target everyone, hopefully. Just to add to his possible selection of, why talk about the prisoners, as Elyse said, it's a very common thing, but it's also, I think it's the sense of imprisonment, not only for those who are physically in prison, but for everyone else in the West Bank and in Gaza, the sense of being blocked and not being able to move and not having liberty.
I might also say that obviously this is a theme that has particular resonance in Palestine, where in a sense the whole country is a prison. But having said that, I think it would be a mistake to make it only a play about Palestine and a political situation. I have a student at this moment who is writing a PhD thesis on prison drama.
Well, it's very much part of the genre.
It's part of the genre. I mean, it's a very important part of the theatrical tradition, and this, I think, is an important contribution.
Maybe one last question.
Yeah. I have a question for Elyse Dodgson about the program at the Royal Court, but I'd like to thank the playwrights because it's a wonderful gift.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Over the years with this extraordinary program at Royal Court, I gather you have a kind of ground plan, but you work in many different countries and many different regions. Does that evolve just through time, or when you go to a country which is a new country, do you plan things and then you adjust as you work, or do you have a similar ground plan?
No, there is no ground plan. I mean, the ground plan is designed. The ground plan is designed for each particular country. I usually go out and spend time in that country, meeting theatre practitioners, and trying to design a project that would suit their needs, and in a way that we have the ability to support it. Sometimes we don't have the ability to support it. So it's a meeting of those two countries, really. But I think in every single project that we do, it's really designed around the needs of those artists, but also the individuals in that workshop.
Okay, we'll bring this to a close. Everyone is still available here for a while. If you have questions, you can approach them.
Yeah, we're going to have a reception here in the room right away also to celebrate the word, but I would like to have a round of applause for all the participants.